Okay, well, hello everyone. I am Lisa Youngblood Hall. I'm the Chief Communications and Experience Officer for the Northshore School District. Thanks for joining us today. We wanted to take this opportunity to be able to share information on the ballot measures that are in the February 8th special election. One of the things I want to be able to share, if you're not completely familiar with Zoom, if you have a question, we're going to go through the PowerPoint. And then if you have a question, you can ask your question in the Q&A. We're going to ask you to put your question in the Q&A. Everyone can see the question. And then if that's maybe the same question that they have, or they think it's a super important one, you have the option to upvote that question so it rises to the top. So I'll remind you of that as we move forward. But again, you can upvote questions as they are put in the Q&A, and that's what we'll be using to ask the question. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Reed at this time.
So thank you, Lisa, and welcome to all of you who joined us this afternoon. It's great to see our North Shore community and have us come together and just be in community this afternoon. So I want to share that we're just 2 weeks out from our February 8th election. And let me find my notes again here, which are now not here. Anyhow, we're just 2 weeks out from our February election, and we've had a lot of busy activities, obviously, that have gone on, and just want to make sure we make space and time to have an opportunity to share about these important ballot measures. So today I have folks joining me that are the architects in many cases, or the guides to the community groups that have provided feedback and led to the recommendations which have led to the ballot measures. So I'd like to welcome Alan Miedema, who's our Executive Director of Instructional Technology, our Chief Financial Officer, Tracy Patterson, of course, our Chief Communications and Experience Officer, Lisa Youngblood Hall, our Communications Support Team, Jennifer Piplick and Alex Clark, and our Executive Director of Support Services and all things related to the capital bond, Tree Ralph. So Dree, why don't you take it away? I know we want to make time for the community questions so that everyone has a clear understanding of what these ballot measures really mean and what they contain. So thanks, Dree.
You bet. Thank you, Dr. Reed. I'm going to share my screen now. Here we go. All right. So North Shore we're really lucky to have such a great student population with over 23,400 students, 3,000 staff members, and 35 schools. And we work really hard to make sure that we can create a caring and safe environment for all of these people. And these bonds and the bond and levies definitely help us to do that. Our North Shore School District students in particular are outstanding. They have an on-time high school graduation rate of 96.6%, well above the Washington State average of 83%. The average SAT scores are 1237, well above the 1073 of the state standard. And one of the ways that reasons why our students are so spectacular is we have a great community with over 2,600 volunteers, exceptionally strong community partnerships, and really amazing staff. Over the last 2 years, we've really watched them flex and take different roles and be able to pivot quickly. One of the groups that I get to lead that have certainly done that over the last 2 years are our bus drivers. During the pandemic, they helped deliver over 288,000 meals. Alan Miedema and his team made sure that our students could stay connected through not only devices, but also hotspots for students who needed help with connectivity. Our district, as a result, has not seen the same dramatic decrease in enrollment that other schools in the Puget Sound area have. We're really proud of that. Unfortunately, K-12 education is still not fully funded by the state, which is why we need voter-approved levies and bonds. We rely on these measures to provide core services to our district. Critical staff positions, support for special education. Simultaneously, it's important to remember these aren't new taxes. They are replacing expiring levies, and the bond continues our important capital work. These bonds and levies stay in our district specifically to help support our students. And Tracy and her team have done an exceptional job over the last 6 years. They've had clean audits, and they've also been recognized for the transparency. And I think this is really key. When we're given tax dollars, we take it on seriously to make sure that we're transparent in how we spend them and respond to our community. So for these measures, we'll be talking today about the Educational Programs and Operations Levy, which we like to call the EP&O levy for short, the Technology Levy, and the Capital Bond. And one thing to note as we do this, Dr. Reed mentioned that we had a lot of community participants to come up with what these measures would contain. In particular, Alan and I got to run pretty giant Zoom activities for this. I got the chance to work with over 70 community volunteers as part of the bond planning task force. And I believe Alan worked with over 100 community volunteers for the technology committee, and they really gave us insight into what you'll see today. One of the benefits of living in a district that is growing and increasing in value is that the measures that we'll talk about today combined will actually result in a decrease in the overall tax rate. So the tax rate in 2021 was $3.63. The proposed tax rate will go down to $3.28. And you can see in this slide, it shows an example of what that looks like on a $700,000 home. And remember, this is assessed value. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Tracy Patterson, our CFO.
Thank you, Dree. Appreciate that. So for this ballot measure, we are bringing forward $265 million in levy funding over the next 4 years that we're asking our voters to approve. And the Educational Programs and Operations Levy renewal will fund staff nurses, mental health support for our kids, elementary classroom, and classroom supports. And it's just so important that we continue to bridge the gap between what Northshore receives from the state and the federal government and what our community helps to support. The EP&O also funds services for students, including special education, multi-language learners, and accelerated learning supports. And it also provides opportunities for students to participate in activities such as band, orchestra, choir, theater, and athletics, which is so important for the overall educational experience of our students. A little bit about the rates. You can see that our current 2021 rate is $1.58 per 1,000 of assessed property value. And then in 2022, it's anticipated to reduce down to $1.42. And you can see the projected tax rates moving forward for the next 4 years. We'd like to, or have projected it to remain at $1.40 per $1,000 of assessed property value. And that's intentional. We are planning to keep our tax rates as flat as possible over the next 4-year period, if approved. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alan, and he can speak to the technology levy renewal. Alan?
Thanks, Tracy. My name is Alan Miedema. I'm the Executive Director for Technology here in Northshore. And as Dree described, I headed up a group of folks called the Technology Advisory Committee, made up of staff, of teachers, of students. And we put together a proposal that we think will carry Northshore into the future with instructional technology. The request is going to be for $80 million spread over the course of the next 4 years. So what does a technology levy fund? Well, as Dree mentioned, the unfortunate reality is there's a gap between what the state of Washington believes is necessary for basic education, is particularly related to instructional technology, and what we're used to and rely on here in North Shore School District. Instructional technology does not show up in the state's definition of basic education, so we need to fund that locally. And so what do we fund with that? Well, within the classroom, just about everything that's connected to a network or seemingly plugged into a wall is funded through the technology levy. The presentation panels in the front of the rooms that the kids and the teachers use every day, the document cameras that they rely on, the audio system that helps make a more inclusive environment for kids, all comes from the technology levy. The devices that the kids use and staff use and teachers use every day. When the pandemic hit, we sent 14,000 devices home with our kids, and we were able to do that through the generosity of the North Shore School District and the forethought of having these devices available. So while our neighbors were scrambling to buy computers, we just turned those over to the kids, let them go home with them and continue their learning. So we fund the computers, we fund the software that runs on those devices, both the applications that the kids use, and for staff, the applications that we use to run the operations of the school district, things like routing buses and conducting payroll. But we also need to fund the professional development and the technology support for staff, for students, and for families. So we fund those through the technology levy also, because as you implement a new system, you need to train people on those things also. Any of us who have ever learned a new technology system knows that. We fund that through technology levy through our local dollars. Next slide, please. And we also fund adaptive and assistive technologies for kids who maybe need some individualized or some specialized learning in the classroom, whether that's because they are on an IEP or have a 504 accommodation, or maybe it's an accelerated kid who just needs something a little bit extra in the classroom. If that involves hardware, if that involves software, it's going to get funded through the technology levy. So in terms of dollars, what does that mean? Well, when I was making a similar presentation like this 4 years ago, so that we could ask for $62 million, we were asking for 48 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. And then as Dree has talked about, because the assessed valuation has gone up in the district, the tax rates have been able to come down and still give us those same funds that we need. Well, now as we're going out for the 2022 levy proposal, we don't need to go back up to 48 cents to get $80 million. 45 cents is going to cover us, and we project that those rates will go down as they always have here in North Shore. And I will now turn it back over to Dree.
Awesome. So I get to talk about our capital projects bond, my favorite part. So we are requesting from our voters $425 million for our schools. And I think in this part of the presentation, you'll see the community impact on what we're asking for, maybe more than anywhere else. In 2018, we did a lot of building systems upgrades with HVAC systems. We did athletic spaces such as softball fields. We took care of a lot of safety and security needs throughout the districts, including installing locks that teachers could easily see and control without a key to their classrooms. But to handle growth, we really focused on several large projects. One was our Ruby Bridges Elementary School. The next was a 30 classroom flexible use space between Skyview Middle School and Canyon Creek Elementary. It's a fun project that uses the topography of the site to go to each of those classes, or each of those campuses, pardon me. And last but certainly not least, we have the North Shore Concert Hall at Inglemoor High School, and I'm very happy to report that this building currently has a temporary certificate of occupancy. We've just been waiting for some concert hall seats to arrive through shipping channels, but they have indeed arrived. So we're really hoping by the end of the month to have a full certificate of occupancy for that building, and we really hope that some of those extracurriculars and co-curricular activities that Tracy mentioned in her slides, such as orchestra, band, etc., that students get to use that space for years to come. But in this particular bond cycle, the community really wanted to focus on kind of increasing the level or the quality level of buildings that we currently have and handle growth by expanding buildings that we currently have. So instead of focusing on a few really large projects, have more projects that were a little smaller in scope. As a result, this will dramatically decrease our need to rely on portables, classrooms. So this plan reduces our portables by about 70 and adds new classroom space across the district by about 110 classrooms. And I see in the chat, we had someone asking about the assessment and analysis done on buildings throughout the district, which schools for hazardous materials, et cetera. We have indeed done an analysis of all of the buildings in the district for hazardous materials. And some of the projects to help reduce that are part of the capital bond that will be used to replace building systems, such as elevators, fire protection, lighting, roofing. That one leads to some of the things that you're talking about in particular, HVAC systems and flooring, which is another one that needs to be replaced for some of those things that you mentioned. We'll also continue to work on our safety through various projects, and we'll continue to upgrade our outdoor learning spaces through inclusive play areas at various elementary schools, as well as fields, including an upgrade to Popkini. But this is the big slide. I'm going to focus in a minute. If you look at the raspberry dots, these are the places that we have large projects going. So we have 5 elementary schools: Fernwood, Crystal Springs, Kenmore L, Maywood Hills, and Woodin are roughly $30 million projects, which will include putting in inclusive playgrounds at those schools, as well as expanding and modernizing those buildings. Along with that, we will be doing the first half of a phased replacement for both Inglemore High School and Leota Middle School. We'll also be expanding Sorensen Early Learning. The other items that we have are the yellow or the orange lines, and those are those building improvement projects that I talked about earlier. And then all of the schools will be receiving some safety and security upgrades, as well as technology infrastructure. This is not to be confused with Alan's things that you plug in. This is actually the infrastructure that, like fiber, et cetera, that goes to our schools. And to echo a few of the slides earlier, the bond portion of the combined tax rate. Also, you'll see we can determine when we pay that back. We have more flexibility. So you'll see some fluctuation in those numbers, and that's really so that we can keep that tax rate flat and predictable over time. So again, these are the 3 measures. The combined tax rate. And one thing that I'll note is growth in the Northshore district has been large. So it's that growth, not only the increase in assessed value, that helps decrease the overall tax rate. Our levies require a simple majority to pass, 50% plus 1. The bonds, however, require a supermajority of 60%. And we have to meet validation requirements. So 40% of the people, of the number of people who cast ballots in November need to vote in this election to validate. I think ballots have actually arrived at people's houses at this point, and the deadline for returning those is February 8th. And with that, I am going to quit sharing my slides so we can get to questions.
All right, thank you, Dree. We are going to start with the first one. Taxes are going up almost exponentially just due to the property values. So maintaining a $700,000 value in the example isn't realistic to this person. What or would increased taxes due to the increased property values not fund the schools regardless without the need to renew the levy?
So, hi, Lisa. I'll answer this. I will first say that we need voter approval to approve the levy so that we can collect proceeds to help support operations for our district. And funding for education in the state of Washington is complicated, and the state does not fully fund school districts, and there's a gap between what the state provides and what it costs to provide all these services to our students and what they need. So with the state not providing funding for any major construction projects in schools, in order to fund these gaps, school districts often utilize bonds and levies, and this local funding allows our school districts to help keep providing the structures and services to our community and that our students and families rely on to grow and thrive. And as Dree mentioned before, and Alan also, we've had a pretty high assessed value growth recently in the Northshore School District, and it's anticipated to continue. So that increases our tax rate or tax base, and that translates to a lower tax rate for our taxpayers. So historically also in Northshore, the tax rates have declined over time. So we do need the taxpayers' support to approve the levy measure so that we are able to receive the proceeds that the taxpayers approve to help offset the gap between the funding that we get from state and what we need for operations. And I think that might answer that question. And go ahead.
I think there was a question about the example of the $700,000 home. And
Right.
I think the whole team looked at that. And do you want to address that, Tracy? I think Alan was going to jump in.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Tracy.
Alan.
I was just going to say, so the $700,000 home was picked intentionally because that is the median home price, according to the county assessors in King County and Snohomish County in the North Shore School District. So we wanted to show that most common, that medium sort of high house pricing there. Another thing to keep in mind is that the levy requests that we're asking for are a cap. Now, regardless of what happens with our assessed valuations, the technology levy will only be authorized to collect $20 million. So if assessed valuations continue to increase, all that means is that tax rates are going to come down so that we still collect only up to that $20 million. If assessed valuations continue to increase, we do not collect more tax dollars. And the other thing is, there was a reference to increasing property value and taxes would just fund these things. Remember, regular property tax dollars go into the state coffers and aren't dedicated locally. The levies and the bonds stay here locally. So your increased property value taxes on your home go to Olympia. Some come back here. Some of them go to Elmira or someplace else. Your levy dollars, your bond dollars all stay right here.
All right. Dree, did you have anything to add, or we'll move?
I think they covered it really well.
Awesome. Okay. How much of the investment made from the previous levy a one-time cost versus ongoing cost? What would happen to the investments made if the levy isn't passed? And I'm going to assume, I'm not sure, some people mistake a capital levy versus a capital bond. So I'll assume they're talking about the levies.
Yeah, I'll use the example of computer purchases. That's a real common sort of purchase. Computers don't last forever, right? So we make that one-time initial purchase of devices for kids, and every kid in North Shore School District now has a device assigned to them. Grades 2 through 12, they get to take that device home, and kindergartners in first grade have got a device with them in the classroom. If the levies don't pass, we don't get to renew those devices. I mean, they're good, stable devices. We take good care of them, but they don't last forever. So without the levy dollars, then it becomes a real problem of what am I going to do with a 6-year-old device, for example, or something like that. At some point, that becomes not functional or operational. And the same thing happens with the other one-time devices and items that we purchase. Eventually, they need to be maintained. They need to be renewed. and we need funds for those things.
Thank you. All right. So this one, there may be some confusion here. How much does CRT impact the budget for North Shore schools? Does anyone, Dr. Reed, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Sure, I will actually take the question. Currently, critical race theory does not impact our budget directly because we don't teach critical race theory. What I will say is there may be an indirect impact on our budget due to the polarizing conversation around CRT and the increasing impact on mental health, in particular of our students who identify as students of color, with this constant barrage of negative energy around this topic. So the trauma that our students and our staff and our families feel result in a continuing need for more and more significant mental health support. So from that standpoint, there is a budget impact as we need to continue to provide more mental health professionals to support our students, which is a key of the EP&O levy. The current White House around inflation, we are absolutely probably one of the thriftiest, most frugal budgeting districts. We endeavor to try and make the most of every dollar that our community trusts us with. We've had clean audits for 6 years and a national GFOA award for transparency. There's very little that we won't do to make products last or utilize roles and positions as effectively as humanly possible. So we're well aware of the inflation. And in fact, the levy rate we've calculated, we've done intentionally very conservatively, which is to say we've presumed an interest rate that's likely higher than what it actually will be, just to make sure that as people budget, they're not going to end up with a situation where we're over budget in our planning. And then the housing market with a 30 to 40% correction, the levy rate, we can't say for sure it's going to go down. But we don't know. That's, I think that's part of this is we're all looking, you as a community and us, right? We're all in the same community, are looking forward, trying to anticipate what those levy rates will be. But again, as folks have shared, the overall amount that we would plan to connect or to collect is what it is. In other words, we won't be collecting more than what is on the ballot. So it's important to note that. And I don't know, Alan, Dree, or Tracy, if you have anything more to add on the housing market correction, if there's something you would like to add to the answer.
Yeah, just one thing I'll remind folks of is that those tax rates are calculated not on individual home prices, but the total assessed valuation of the entire district. Even when we had the correction a few years ago that saw a lot of home prices come down, the actual assessed valuation of the district as a whole continued to go up. So the rates were not as significantly impacted as you might have thought. We continued to build buildings in North Shore. We continued to turn fields into houses and things like that. So the district's AV continued to go up, even while my house price, I live here in the district, came down a little bit.
Thanks, Alan.
I'll just add on our planning with our financial advisor that we're very conservative on our assessed value growth in future years. And in the past, if you look at the past, I don't know, probably 7-8 years, average growth in this district has been probably in excess of 10% a year. So we're planning for 4%, right? And so we feel that we give ourselves ample room there. And as Dr. Reed mentioned, we're careful to use an interest rate that's a bit higher than it's anticipated, just that we're extra conservative. And generally speaking, we're very close and to our estimated rates. And I'm very confident that we can make that happen again.
All right, next question. For the last bond, there was a lot of talk about a new middle school. Why are we not doing that since Skyview has so many students? Maybe if Skyview wasn't so crowded, they would not have had as bad of a COVID outbreak and not had to temporarily close. Dree, would you like to start with that?
No, actually, I'll start with that, Lisa,
okay.
And then I'll give it to Dree.
Okay.
I want to clarify, we did not close Skyview because of a COVID outbreak. We closed Skyview because we were not able to safely staff the school. We had a number of faculty and other positions within the school that we were not able to fill to enable us to safely run school. We've actually had similar COVID numbers at almost all of our schools, but we were able to safely staff them. So I just want to clear up that misconception. So Dree.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Reed. And, there were several projects that were discussed by the task force that I mentioned. One of them was certainly what we called MALT-B Phase 2, which would be building a middle school on the same site that Ruby Bridges Elementary School was built on. And as we looked at the numbers, one of the great things about doing this every 4 years is we get to evaluate the information at that exact time. And as we looked at the numbers, we weren't having the same explosive growth that we had in the past. And the committee felt very strongly that we needed to work on the infrastructure that we had before we built a new middle school, in large part because the capacity at all of the middle schools, there still exists capacity projected for the next 4 years. Skyview being an example actually has about 75 to 140 seats available. So we wanted to take advantage of this moment in North Shore that we could really focus on taking care of the buildings that we had. We have elementary schools, for example, Kenmore L, that was built in the 1950s that haven't been modernized since. So this is a great way to take care of those resources, as well as providing for some growth, right, around the district for those infill developments. Alan always likes to talk about in his neighborhood, they're building a large building with multiple units in every vacant field, as opposed to just a single family house. So we have to be able to take care of those students as they come into our schools as well. And the committee really felt like working across the district was most important. One of the other projects that people really liked was the middle school project, but we also talked about potentially building a pool. It's one of the things that the district doesn't have. It's a resource that would be great for our student athletes, but also students across the district to be able to work swimming into the curriculum for all of them in a meaningful way. Dr. Reed talks about how important that is for some of our safety. But again, as the committee looked at, the task force looked at our current buildings, they really felt like we needed to focus this bond on those buildings. So that's why that particular project was not included in this bond.
Thank you. So again, there is no pool in the bond. Is that correct, Bree?
That is correct.
Thank you. All right. What work are you doing to get the state to fully fund education, especially for special education? Until this system is fixed, I'm happy to support the district and vote in favor of these bonds and levies.
I'll take that one. We are regularly meeting with our legislators who also honestly understand this high need. And we continue each year, particularly our elected board of directors, work with the elected board of directors across the state, and this remains a high priority for our School Board Directors Association, our Special Ed Directors Association, our superintendents group, our principals group. It's just each and every child deserves the very best we can offer, and those services in some cases cost a little more. It's not just a formula. We're talking about students, not numbers and data points. So really appreciate your support, and we're continuing to do our work as best we can until those formulas, are updated. The idea that you can artificially create a percentage for a district and limit that percentage to somehow mirror the number of children that require supports, it defies logic. So, but I appreciate you calling that out. We're continuing to work on it, and thanks for your support in the meantime.
All right. When would this levy take effect? I guess you might speak to each of the measures.
Well, I will say that for the EP&O levy, so we're asking voters to approve the proposition on February 8, 2022 for collection to begin in 2023 and so on. So for the next 4 years, once this proposition, if it's approved by our voters, then that will take effect. It will take effect for the 4-year cycle for each of the amounts that we have put forward. And the same would be true for the bond and the technology levy.
I'm surprised that laptop renewals aren't funded by extramural grants, broadband especially. Anyone want to speak to that?
Sure. I don't quite know what extramural grants would be, but I'll just say for grants in general, there is an opportunity within some of the what could be one-time dollars that we've got right now to fund some device purchase, and we're certainly going to be taking advantage of that. But again, remember, we need to be able to have a reliable source to replace these devices as they age out year after year after year. Along the way, if there are opportunities to take advantage of grant dollars to pull in devices, buy devices for kids, we will certainly take the utmost advantage of those that we can. But we can't rely on those kind of opportunities as a planning measure. If they come up and we have the happy fortune of having some additional dollars, and we will take advantage of those and make wise decisions on how we will spend additional dollars. The broadband, I don't quite know what we mean by the reference to broadband there. We don't fund broadband through Tech Levy.
Okay. All right. Of the $20 million collected each year for the technology levy, how much specifically is going to devices versus toward training and overhead? For instance, if we bought 24,000 Chromebooks at $300 each year, which we don't, they're saying, I'm assuming he says the taxpayers covered 25%. It would only account for 7.2 million. And this seems like a ton of money is going to overhead.
Right, and I can handle that, of course. There's a variety of things that we pay for within the technology levy other than devices for students. You're right. If we were to buy 24,000 Chromebooks at 300 and then plan on replacing those, just that by itself would be 7 million. Now, for our planning purposes, we assumed a little bit of an inflation on both the number of kids and the number of devices, and we allocated for Chromebook purchases right around $8 million over the course of the 4 years. But remember, we also have iPads that we're getting for the younger kids who maybe aren't ready for a Chromebook. We have Windows devices and Mac OS devices that we need to get kids for some specialized circumstances. And we have a lot of devices that we get for staff that we also pay for out of the technology levy, that we renew those. But beyond physical devices, remember, there are the presentation systems in the classroom. There are the document cameras. There are still some projectors in some places that we fund and make available. There's all the software that we have to license to run on these systems. The district leans on the technology levy to fund over $2 million a year in operational software systems that we use just to run this organization that the state doesn't fund for us. So that's a huge chunk of money that we keep out of the general fund. So then within the general fund, we can spend those on other programs. So it's wise to keep an eye on these types of things, but there is a lot that we buy out of technology that is not a piece of hardware.
Okay. Did anyone want to add to that?
I think Alan really was thoughtful in sharing that. I also think that professional development training, both for students and staff, are sometimes underrated. But if we're not providing training for our student, staff, and our families recently in remote learning, we're not able to maximize the tools we want to use. So there absolutely within that budget is high caliber training, support, instructional technology coordinators, and building level staff to support our students and staff. Just getting a tool without the means to use it is not a really an effective practice. Alan, I don't know if you want to share any more.
I do. I'm so glad you brought that up because I missed that. That was one of the things that we heard loud and clear from our community members who work in companies like SpaceX and like T-Mobile that said, boy, you really have to make sure that you spend wisely and effectively around professional development. In these big tech companies who do roll out these trainings, they know professional development is the most important dollars that you spend on these systems. Otherwise, you end up with things that people don't know how to use. And so we heard that loud and clear, and we are providing ample funding for professional development for all our users.
And Dr. Reed,
I would argue that this meeting is possible because of our technology levy,
Yeah,
right?
true.
This platform, I would also share that we have a new learning management system that all students and staff across the system are using that has a direct impact on our students. It's one of the things students tell me is the most important part of their tool right now. So they're just all kinds. When I think of the devices, that's potentially the smallest purchase, really. It's all that lives around that supports that. And Dree, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say I've had the chance to talk to many community groups over the last month, and I was really glad you mentioned the families in that as far as training goes, because several of the parents have commented in various presentations that I've done how important that has been. And then I also get the chance to work with our transportation department, and we get to work on the software that helps us route the buses, that helps inform the parents and guardians where to pick up their kids when we have various weather events and other things. So all of that, it's kind of amazing to think of the little city that we run, right? And how much that technology is needed beyond, like Alan said, the actual device itself.
Leadership is a team sport. I'm glad you mentioned that because we've had districts connect with us on how we're using our new app that families are able to use for transportation. Because when we've had to reroute buses because of our driver shortages, we've been able to push that information out in real time. And parents have, like really rapid communication that's transparent and timely. So I just, I can't think of any part of our operation that isn't enhanced by technology.
Yeah.
And for me to say that's a big deal, because I find that I think I'm the dinosaur in the group on that topic.
So one quick question we have is this being recorded so it can be shared? Yes, absolutely. I'm going to ask another question that's related to the devices. How can it be justified that every single student requires their own device?
Well, certainly we understand that we now live in a world where people need access to information and resources at any time during the day, right? And also we live during a time when we are hyper focused on making sure that all kids have equitable access to information and resources. So one of the directives that we got loud and clear again from our community that worked with us on this is we don't want to create tiers of opportunities within North Shore School District. We want to know that if a kid needs a device at home to do their work, that they've got that device, that they've got high-speed internet access as best we can provide it for them so that they can do their work, so that they've got a level playing field. And we had the unfortunate real life opportunity to find this out during the pandemic. When we told kids we had to go home for our learning and said, but we want to provide you a device so that you can keep your learning moving forward. I was blown away by the number of kids who said, I don't have anything at home, or if I want to use something at home, I got to share it with 5 different people. We ended up sending 14,000 devices home almost immediately across the entire district, just so kids could continue their learning moving forward. And even though we know from talking to kids after they came back, there were still kids who were sharing devices. There were still kids who didn't have what they needed. So our community got together and said, you know what, we're going to remove that barrier for learning for these students. We're going to say every kid gets a device, no excuses. Nobody's got to raise their hand. Nobody's got to out themselves as being someone who can't afford these things. We're going to make sure that they have what they need. And I mean, I'm a community member here. I've lived in the district now for 20 plus years, raised my kids here. I'm proud of that decision that we made to say every kid's going to have an equal opportunity in North Shore.
Well, and one of the other things that I like in the slides that you go through, and I've heard you talk about what you've done with your committee, is that adaptive learning piece, right? So in every classroom, students can, again, I'm like the urban planner on this conversation, but to me, it sounds cool. And I've heard various teacher groups that they get to tailorize their plans for the students. So if we have a student who maybe needs a little more advanced work, they have access to that. Maybe a student who needs a little catch-up work, they have access to that, all in the same classroom. And it really helps the teacher tailor the experience to the students, which I think is a hallmark of a North Shore education.
It's critical. I agree.
Also one of the
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Reed, go
Well, I
ahead.
was just going to say, it's also one of the strategies that was utilized in the post-Katrina era in terms of supporting students in that academic acceleration. The ability to personalize and push out lessons and supports on district devices is just really critical in real time. And Tracy?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
It's hard on this.
but I just want to emphasize also that we provided connectivity devices to families so that they can access the internet and they can access our learning systems and keep that communication going, keep their learning going. So I think that's been a really tremendous effort on the technology department's part, Alan, and I think it's well appreciated by our families.
One thing I'm just going to add struck me was the idea that there were students doing their homework on cell phones. The idea that there were families of, that had more than one student in the schools and they had to wait to do their homework until the other student was done with their homework. So this is part of that equity piece that we're talking about.
A couple of things have shown up in the chat. One is a majority of students in the district have plenty of computing technology at home. That in fact is not true. We found that out during the pandemic, is that kids didn't have as much access to high-speed, reliable technology as we may have thought they had. Another question about follow-up to the tech levy question. So I'll just cut to the chase. It says disingenuous to tout technology levy as technology for education. In fact, the majority of the money by your own admission goes to operation. I did not say that, and it's not true. The majority of the money does not go to operations. I think the calculation that we did was, I think it's 87% of the technology levy dollars that we collect go to classroom supports. My point was there are operational expenses that we make that do move the district forward for things like bus routing system and things like that. But the vast majority of the dollars that we spend head for the classroom, either in devices, in software, in training, in, like I said before, presentation panels, adaptive technologies, these types of things. So the vast majority does go to the classroom.
Oh, thanks,
Right.
Alan. Lisa?
So we have about 10 minutes left. Here's a switch to another topic here. Evergreen Hospital is said to show 0 COVID patients from 1 to 19 years old and has for quite some time. When will the masks come off our kids? If the teachers want to wear them, fine.
I think is there more to that, Lisa?
Yeah, I guess this person is claiming that it's child abuse and damaging to children's mental health.
Interestingly, these topics are somewhat connected, although you have to, I think, look deeply at it. Currently, the governor has a mandate in the state that all staff, students, and any personnel on campus, school campuses, must wear a mask. The Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction has shared that if we don't follow the governor's mandate, we will not be funded. Since I take an oath of office saying that I will support and live and rule and lead by the mandates of this state, of the state of Washington, if we chose to remove masks from our students, we would lose all state funding and therefore would need to run much more broad scale levies to support an over $450 million a year operating budget, which isn't really possible. So I think what we're trying to do is make sure we follow the current mandate as it's listed, as we're obligated to do, and not incur financial penalties at this time. So we also want to model for our students that when there is a mandate or there is a requirement that we do follow it. So appreciate the perspective. And at this time, we're going to follow the law of the land as it is for our district.
Let's see, Alan, this person is asking you to share a spreadsheet that demonstrates the 87% number.
Yeah, well, the 87%, I'm trying to recall if that's accurate. I think you can pull that together, not from a spreadsheet, but from the documents that we shared with the board on the different projects that we were proposing for the levy, for the student devices, for the instructional software that we run, for the professional development, for staff members, for the funding for people who are supporting teachers in the classroom. When you bundle all that together, you're well in excess of that 80% number supporting kids in the classroom. If you want to pull that up, I think if you go out to board docs, you can pull those materials up from the board study session that we conducted.
Thank you. Let's see, one more question about the mandates. The governor cannot create law, only the legislature can do so. Is the mandate actually legal? I don't know if that's for us.
Well, I'm not, I think the question about legality probably is better asked of the governor and the legislature. What I know is the direction we receive as a school district is that we need to follow the mandate. So I think if there's a question on the legality, we're not going to expend district resources on that question. I would encourage community members who have that concern to reach out to their legislator or the governor and pose those questions.
All right, any additional questions? We have about 7 more minutes. Seven more minutes. Any more questions regarding the bond and levies? Dree, Dr. Reed, Alan, Tracy, is there anything you wanted to add just to make sure? Oh, this is interesting. Why don't we use 6-year levies instead of bonds? That's a good question.
I can say levies are for learning and bonds are for building. So typically that's a very common phrase in school districts that we utilize. But really the levies are used to support our operations of the district, which includes transportation, nutrition services, business services, and all those things that support our instructional services. So bonds are really there for an investment and modernizing and building new buildings to support our educational district, to support our kids and families. So that's my 2 cents. Alan and Dree.
Well, I do know Seattle because of their assessed valuation and so forth is ginormous compared to Northshore. That their capacity for a levy is much greater than the capacity we would be able to even run. I would also say, and it sounds like Dree is chomping at the bit to answer this.
No, it's not good.
But I would also say that we've worked really, really hard in Northshore. Folks that came before me, there's been a long tradition of administrative and community partners working together to really carefully have our bonds layer in each 4 years so that we can maintain a level, predictable tax rate. Which isn't a shock at any given time to our community. So whether it's a 4-year cycle or a 6-year cycle or a 2-year cycle, I think once you get on that cycle, it's really important for planning to retain that cycle. And we've been blessed here in Northshore with great forethought about that. And Dree, you might want to add to that.
Yeah, and this kind of dovetails on what you just talked about. I like to think of the bond as you would about a house purchase, right? Like we get to adjust and pay for these things over a 20-year cycle, which enables all the people who are using it to pay for it, not just the 6-year period or 4-year period of the levy. On top of that, Dr. Reed, what a bond enables us to do is to sell the bonds when we need to build the project so we can build a whole project. If we do a levy, the funds come in after the taxes are paid. So it really is a financing tool that allows us to do large projects at today's cost as opposed to whatever the construction escalation will be when we get the funds in with the levy. So there's a lot of reasons why we choose to do it as a bond. But I like to think of it as I would a home purchase. It's for most of us, some people get to do those things in cash, but most of us need some kind of financing tool that lasts for a long period of time, because the resource lasts for a long period of time. And we're dealing with buildings that are built in the 1950s at this point. So they do last for a long period of time. Allen's equipment doesn't have the same life cycle, so it makes sense to do that in a levy kind of way.
Okay, a couple more bond questions. Are you planning on shifting any students to alternate school sites while their school is under construction? And you might even talk to those that may not be part of the bond in that way.
Yeah, this is a great question. So there's several elementary schools that aren't part of the bigger packages this year that frankly we need to look at upgrading and modernizing. But one of the reasons why these 5 schools rose to the top is they had the need and there was capacity on the site for us to do construction on the site. The school board, however, when they were doing their study session and conversations around this bond in particular, they have told me very clearly that I need to be planning for a swing site, and that's what is being described in this question, right? For our next bond when we go out. So some of our sites that are very tight and we can't do phased construction in, that we will have somewhere to move students. But for the projects for this particular bond, we are planning to phase them and keep the students on site as we do the construction.
Okay, another one, Dree, we got a couple minutes left. Wouldn't maintenance, repair, replacement of existing assets be operational and thus appropriate to be a levy?
So we have a couple of different, we like to call them buckets in our bond cycle. We have the capital bond, it's very rigorous, the guidelines that we use for what we determine as a capital project as opposed to a regular repair and maintenance. It has to be substantive, it has to be a true modernization. And so I talked about the building improvement projects. Those are probably the ones that would potentially be able to be used as a levy. But at this point, it's easier for us to manage it all under the same cycle. And when you look at the cost breakout of that $425 million, only 37 of that are going to those building improvement projects. So those are the replacing of the HVAC systems, the elevators, the flooring, the lighting. So that's what I would say about that.
Okay. Let's see, several attendees have thanked you for holding this. Question for the people in this room. Do you think NSD is administratively top heavy relative to neighboring and similar districts like Lake Washington, Bellevue, and Everett? If not, why?
Sure, we're not. We meet regularly. Our budgets are similarly planned. I think what creates, I don't know if it's confusion, but what creates different scenarios is different districts use different titles for district office staff. I think in some cases we're actually understaffed. And I know it's been all hands on deck over the last number of months. So we try to make sure we have a true line from the boardroom to the classroom, and all district staff at this time have been out substituting either as principals, teachers, paraeducators, bus dispatchers, et cetera. So we're very much in line with our surrounding districts. And I would even argue a little less robust in the district leadership realm than some of our peer districts in the region.
Well, guess what? We have no more questions and it's 1:01. So at this point, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Dr. Reed, any of our panelists, do you have any last words?
The last 2 words are thank you. We're grateful for you, our community, and really appreciate the civility of today's conversation and thoughtfulness. So thank you very much.
just really quickly, some people asked about the video. I know Alex is in the background. We will figure out how to share the link. I think if you registered, we should be able to share it out to you to make sure you have it, but we will also have it on our website pretty shortly.
Yeah, knowledge is power. And the more information we have, the better decisions we can make as a community. These ballot measures are at times complex, and our goal is to make them just really clear for everyone so we all understand what we're talking about.
Finally, I might suggest that if you found this helpful, you should either share the video, but also tell your fellow community members that we're having another Q&A on presentation and Q&A on Thursday evening at 6 p.m. And we have sent the links out. We will do that again. We'll send a reminder out in the next day or so. And we hope those who weren't able to join us will do so on Thursday evening.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Thank
All right,
you.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.